Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on this webinar. Today is a very informal lunch and learns. My name is Carmen Suriello, and I'm the Managing Director of Analyze and Improve. I have over 25 years of experience in continuous improvement and various fields of management and operational improvement. For the purpose of this webinar, I prefer to keep your questions, if possible, to the end, but feel free to interrupt me if you have something you want to say during the slides. We'll keep this as informal as possible. So I came across a very good book by Michael Watkins entitled The First 90 Days. It's a really, really good resource, which I've used several times during my career transitions from one role to another. Now, within this book, there's an actual very good and excellent section actually called the STaRS model. And the reason I like it is because it articulates something that took me quite a few years to understand myself. And that is that very, very often, it's not that you have a good or bad employee or a good or bad manager, but rather perhaps the person is not assigned to the correct type of work or situation. Okay. There are a couple of things that happen if you get this right. Okay, the first is that the person themselves, the manager, the employee, gets to actually thrive and enjoy the work. And secondly, the actual company or group also generates much, much better results. Okay, and the two together then gives you a better chance for success and improvement when you're rolling out the work or the production or whatever the case may be for your organization. Okay. Especially this, what you're about to see, is especially true if you target senior people in the organization. So why don't we get started with a quick survey question, and we will go right into it. So in your opinion, just before you actually see some of the material, what kind of work scenario do you think you are personally best suited for? And you can pick up to two from the ones you see at the bottom. Are you an 80% person with the urgent tasks? Are you the 20% focus on details? Do you like project structure? Do you like improving and using root cause analysis? Or do you like projects and the challenge of dealing with negative work environments? Okay, we'll give everyone a few minutes to do this. As everyone's doing this, one thing that becomes interesting in doing this little kind of survey is it forces one to think through your own style. So a lot of times we don't think of ourselves as being in any one of these particular buckets, but part of seeing this in a survey or seeing the slides in a couple of minutes is to force you to think about a little bit, what are the things you enjoy doing and what do you think you're good at? So what's very nice right off the bat is we have a nice distribution of qualities across the group. There seems to be, the first one seems to be the highest with the 80% type of characteristic, but there's also the other ones being selected. So what this all means and how it applies to actual work and actual business challenges is going to be very apparent in a couple of minutes. And we will come back to this survey at the end to see what it all means. Thank you very much. Right. So what type of manager do you think you're best at? So the questions that you saw in the survey actually links to the STaRS model. And the STaRS model, if you look at, for instance, there's quite a few of us that had the 80% big picture. So what that means is those individuals are best suited to what's called a turnaround organization. And I will go into this in a few minutes. Other ones in there, if you're a 20% person where you like focusing on the details, so that's more about the sustaining phase of the organization. If you're more into project structure, you'd be more of a startup person. If you like the idea of improving and using root cause analysis, that's more of a realignment phase. And then the last one, which is a little bit of a curveball, is it's still a project structure, but you're dealing with a negative work environment. And that's sometimes you need to be called upon to do a shutdown. Okay, so those are kind of the four, and the fifth one is a special case of the first four. So the STaRS model, it's part of this book in the first 90 days. And Watkins writes about the STaRS framework, which basically what's really good about it is it creates a language for describing the situation that people are in, the process that are in, the products, and the business itself. So the STaRS model is a key point that the businesses tend to move predictably from one type of situation to another. And you'll see a graphic that speaks to this. And the basic 4 situations of any business, it doesn't have to be just your company, it could be any business that you read about, is startup, turnaround, realignment, and sustaining success. Those are the main 4. How it all fits together is in this format. And if you ignore the last one on the right, shut down for a second, you see that the 4, they interconnect in some way. So the bottom right is startup, which is usually how a business starts. And as the business succeeds, it starts moving into different phases of this box. So as you can see, if it succeeds, it goes to sustaining success. If it continues to succeed, it might loop back around a few times, which I'll speak to. And then there's a couple of other ones that kick in if there's failures in any particular phase. Let's take a look at each one at a time so that you can get a better understanding. So startup is, there's a lot of you in the audience that are used to project language. So it's either a greenfield or brownfield type project. It could be signifying the growth or need to implement new equipment or new systems. The challenge with the startup operation is you're building structures, you're building systems from scratch, and generally you have limited resources. The opportunity, of course, if you're part of this scenario of a startup, is you get the opportunity to do things right from the beginning. There's no pre-existing culture, there's no pre-existing problems that you need to address. If you're successful in the startup phase, if this was your plant and you're the manager, then you have the joy of seeing your business or your group move from startup to sustaining success. So you're in a sustaining and stability mode, and you've just accomplished and absorbed some kind of a growth cycle. Now, of course, if you're in a startup mode and you fail, then there's nothing else to fall back on. So a startup that fails goes down to the shutdown phase. There's nothing else to salvage in this scenario. The kind of person that you need to, in this example of a manager that's best suited to a startup, is someone that is projects oriented with very clear start and stop dates, very clear purpose, very clear scope and boundaries, has an entrepreneur spirit, and exhibits a lot of positive energy. So those are the kind of the characteristics that best fits an enterprise or an organization that is in a startup mode. If you're in the realignment, what does that mean? So realignment means you're not really able to achieve your goals and objectives. Okay, you're not achieving whatever you were hoping to achieve, whether it's a certain return of investment or a certain profit margin, but you still have the luxury of time to resolve the issue. There's not that criticalness of it falling apart overnight. So the challenge here is convincing the employees in your group that change is necessary because things are working and things are actually progressing, but not as well as you had hoped. Sometimes that burning platform is not clear. So convincing people that change is necessary is an important part of the challenge. The opportunity is that the organization already has significant pockets of strength. In other words, you already have good people, you already have good things involved, you're already creating stuff or selling stuff, and that part is going well. So when we're talking about the realignment, that's the top left of that model. If you're successful in realigning your group or realigning your company, then you can move back into the sustaining stability phase, and you've got that recovery cycle going. If, on the other hand, you fail, now you are what is called a turnaround phase. So now you're more in crisis mode, and we'll talk about turnaround in a second. The characteristics of a manager in the realignment phase is you have a very, very strong improvement mentality. You're able to run a lot of root cause analysis type of work, implement corrective actions. You're focusing on stabilizing your process, and you have a very positive outcome or spirit, so to speak. So turnaround is the one we were referring to about a minute ago, and now it's a little bit critical. It's a little bit more critical. So very similar to realignment, except now time is your enemy. Businesses will go under or lose relevancy if your performance continues in this turnaround phase, in this very poor phase, perhaps for more than 3 to 9 months. So anything below could be as short as a couple of months. If you stay here too long, you may have to shut down, for instance. So the challenges here is you need to re-energize demoralized people, because people now know that things are bad, that things are going wrong. You need to handle time pressure as well as other pressures, of course. The opportunity here, of course, is that everyone recognizes that change is necessary. You don't have to sell the need for change. People and your employees know that this is very critical, and that you definitely have to have some change that takes place. And here, every little success goes a long way. Every little minor improvement has a big impact. So if you're successful in the turnaround phase, then the great thing here is the same thing happens as the realignment phase, is you've moved your company, your department, away from this critical phase of turnaround, and you moved it back to sustaining success. So basically a stable phase. It is called a crisis cycle because it's very critical, because obviously, as you can see in the next bullet, if you fail in the turnaround, you have nothing else to fall back on. A company or a business that fails turnaround then goes back into shutdown mode. So what are the characteristics of a manager in this phase if you have an organization in turnaround? You have someone who's a firefighter, likes to work fast, not afraid to think outside the box, challenge the status quo. You have a very accelerated pace with urgency. That is sometimes referred to as that 80% person, the person who's not too overly worried about the details, just get it done, get it started, get it going, get it moving. And you need to be able to deal with negative energy. Okay, so that's part of the characteristic of this manager. So what about the infamous sustaining success? That was one of the 4 boxes. This is a very interesting phase, okay? In this one, you have an operation that's already stable. You have a very stable operation. It's achieving the goals, it's following the procedures, it is doing what you hoped that the organization would do. What is the challenge here? The challenge here is perhaps living in the shadow of a revered leader. What does that mean? Is that if someone else was here before you, that was already, turned the organization around or realigned the organization, so there's a lot of rah-rah associated with that person, this new person has to find a way of carving their own niche in the company, for instance. You may also have to find ways to take business to a new level because you have that nice, stable process. What are some of the new opportunities that are available to you now that you have that stability? The opportunity is you have a strong team that's already in place, and you have a foundation for success, because if you're already in this phase, you have a lot of things that are going correctly for you. So if you're successful, this one is a little bit counterintuitive, but it says if you have a highly sustainable process, the cycle that starts is it moves you back to startup cycle, meaning there could be an opportunity here to kick off something brand new, to kick off something that's an expansion or a new idea, something that pushes the boundary of something that is already working very, very well. If you fail, then you move back down to realignment. Okay, so if you're not able to have a nice, smooth, sustaining process and organization, then you fall back to realignment and you focus on those priorities. And it is called this recovery cycle. So what are the characteristics of this manager? So this manager is a little different than some of the other ones you saw in previous slides. Very detailed oriented, likes the routines, a lot of the mundane roles that some people do not enjoy doing, things of ensuring people to follow existing systems and procedures, follow instructions. That's what this phase is all about, okay? It's sometimes also called the 20% person, the person who's very comfortable working in that small area of details, making sure that all the things we've defined and all the processes and procedures that have been worked on in the previous phases are actually being used properly by everyone and often considered neutral energy. So those are the four main phases that you see in the box on the left-hand side. There is a fifth one that I referred to at the beginning, and that is shutdown. Some of you in the audience may have an opportunity to be in this kind of scenario. It's not something that's very enjoyable, but it does come up in people's careers. So this is where you have to shut down an operation, you have to sell an asset, or you have to give up on a specific product, okay? And the idea here is the characteristic of this manager is you need to be sort of projects oriented. You're still a projects person, but now you're dealing with a lot of negative energy, okay? People can be very depressed, they're not sure what the future holds, but someone still has to do this work. So you're dealing with a lot of negative energy. You'll need to be able to detach yourself a little bit from the emotions and deal with ways to address all this negative energy. And so when you combine those four phases with the shutdown one, it gives you a very good idea of how the businesses and the departments can move from one phase to the other. And more importantly, what kind of role and what kind of person is best suited for each one of these, okay? So just as a little bit of a discussion, if anybody would like to jump in, is how do you find, or where does these phases actually fit in a grid that looks like this? So for instance, going up to down, you have phases that require more learning. You're actually more absorbing information versus more doing of the work. And then on the columns, you have what the author often refers to as, are you in more offensive position or defensive? Are you trying to be more aggressive in the phase that you're in, or more protecting the turf that you already have built, okay? So while we have this slide open, if anybody would like to volunteer and maybe I can pick an example, for example, a startup. Anybody, either in texting or visually by putting on your cameras and your mic, where do you think startup fits in this model? And I'll give it a couple of seconds in case anybody wants to jump in.
More doing. More.
Yeah, it's definitely more doing, right? It's in startup, we're not trying to overly learn and be introspective on it. So we're definitely more in a doing phase, definitely. And do we think it's more of an offense or more of a defense in terms of startup?
More offense. Just
correct. More offense, right? There's nothing to protect. There's no prior information or prior platform to kind of entrench and protect. So it's all about offense. You're getting it done, and you're trying to figure out as best as possible and as quickly as possible what do these things deal with. So I do see a question. I will answer that question a little bit more in detail afterwards, but the question is, how long do these phases last? There's no quick answer for this. The phases are very fluid, and sometimes they can be as short as a couple of months, and they can go as far as a year, but probably not more than that. After that, there is some moving back and forth between phases that happens in most organizations. So probably between a few months and a year. So thank you for adding some information to the discussion. This is where all four of them actually fit in. So we just use startup as a very as a first example, but you can see where the other ones fit in. If we take another one, for instance, the sustaining success or the stable one, that's clear on the opposite side, on the top right. That one is more about learning, right? Because you already have something that's very smooth, very stable. So you're more in a learning mode. You're not in a doing mode. And it's definitely more defensive. Things are working. Things are very good. Things are very solid. People are working very well. So you're defending your existing position. And that's the difference in mentality that you need to have as a manager or as an employee. Okay. So having said all that, is when you go back to the scenarios that you just did the questions on, now you have a little bit of a better appreciation for what these questions mean, right? The questions about doing the 80% versus doing the 20%, project structure, root cause analysis. Is there anyone in the group that has perhaps any thoughts about their own organization or a place that they're in? And maybe you may not want to talk about yourself, but you can talk about others that you know that would be a good fit within any of these bullets. So it's a little bit of an open discussion at this point.
It's more like an experience. If I can pick, when Thomson was shutting down, and if someone has more or less all the things that we mentioned, have a little bit of turnaround, sustaining, startup, and realignment. And the second point is, the manager most of the time was given, not was tasked to do it, not like
Yeah.
Most likely was asked. It's not like we can nominate or select them to do the task. Not necessarily is suitable or
excellent point. I'll definitely jump on your second point, Henry, and that is one of the things that hopefully you get out of this little presentation is that is a mistake that all organizations do, is that we have a manager or superintendent, president, it doesn't matter what senior role we're talking about. And we tend to keep that person throughout the journey and throughout the fluctuations of this business, okay? And what this theory is showing is that could be the incorrect way of doing this kind of work. And some of you know that I've told the story about my own experience in one manager that I worked for. And this person knew that they were doing the 80%. He knew that was his strength. He was a turnaround expert. He was a turnaround guru, if you wish, and he knew that about himself. See, knowing that about yourself is half the journey. The other half of the journey is he knew that one day when the plant was able to become sustaining and stable, that he was the incorrect person to run that business, and he knew that about himself. So it's kind of a 50-50 thing. You have to know what you're good at, and you have to be willing to move on. And hopefully the organization understands that the best way of ensuring success is to have the right people in the right roles. Excellent. That was a good discussion. So let's go back and just do a little bit of a wrap up. So as a bit of a wrap up, it's the idea here is that at Analyze and Improve, we provide a very customized approach to understanding and solving issues, things like problems and opportunities. Part of this journey is definitely to understand what phase the operation is presently in. So this STaRS model that you just saw is just one of the many concepts we use to drive improvement and overall success for our clients. The needs and the tools you need required very, very great or very much or a lot, depending on what phase you are in, okay? And this is a little bit of a introspective, understanding that about yourself, but also understanding how your own organization or your own group or your own company can benefit from this type of an understanding, this kind of an approach. So there is a few poll questions that I will launch, and at the same time, I will look at any questions some of you may have written in the windows. So I will launch question number 1, which is about the value of this webinar. And at the same time, I will have a look at any questions that are showing up. Yeah, so the first question by Asim is, does this mean that we should need a different manager every time we're in a different stage? So that's a tricky question. I mean, ideally, there has to be a little bit of a discussion. There's some, if you notice, some of the boxes or some of the phases have a little bit of an overlap, and you can have the same person doing the same role, okay? But some of the boxes are completely different. So I'll pick on myself. I'm definitely more on the 80% project management type of person. I am not very well suited to the 20% detailed type of tasks. So as soon as an organization is in that phase, I know that my own qualifications or my own desires and strengths are not good for that type of organization. Someone else should come in and do it, okay? So I wouldn't necessarily say you need someone new per phase, but you definitely need to see if you're entering a phase that requires a totally different skill set, and identifying what that skill set is. So very good question. Yeah, and so as a follow-up, the question is, should we let managers know up front? Yes, I mean, as I mentioned in my example of someone I worked for personally, this person had gone through this self-learning, and so this person knew that they were very, very good at certain things, specifically turnaround, and that they were not good at other things, specifically sustaining. And so if we can get some of that language going for people to understand, both not only as a manager, I'm using manager language because this presentation was all about the change and the improvement of an organization. But same thing as an employee. If you are a person working in a company, knowing what those skill sets are that you're very good at and that you enjoy doing makes it easier for you to have a very enjoyable career and a strong career where you'll have a lot of success. Okay, good question. Another question. Yeah, I mentioned how long each stage lasts, so I think I answered that question. There's no magic answer, but if you spend a few minutes thinking of other companies out there, you'll notice there's a lot of fluidity, right? You grow, you get good at it, and then you either fall down a little bit, or you need to grow a bit more. So there is a lot of moving back and forth between boxes as the industry changes and as your competitors change. So probably between a few months to a year. Okay, I think that's all for the questions. And then I will leave it at that. So if you have any other questions, feel free to contact us at contact@analyzeandimprove.com. And thank you very much for spending your lunch with us today. Take care, everyone.